We were at a one of the networking events, and we were at in the corner of the room, and he kind of walked up to me and said, "Tom, is the staffing industry a dying industry?" Uh, Now that's just one, but and now I maybe me talking to you, maybe me talking to my wife, but I'm not going to get up in a public forum and say, "Hey, the staffing industry is a dying industry." But let me tell you, I've had numerous calls by people running enterprise size companies in the United States saying to me, making the staffing is a dying industry. So let's unpack that. Is staffing a dying industry, or are there new human capital business models that are emerging? Hello, Tom Kosnik.
Hi, Chris Ryan.
Welcome to The Next Shift. Chris and myself, this is our first podcast, and today we're going to be unpacking the state of the staffing industry. But I'd like to give you just a little bit of introduction on the podcast here. Chris has got a lot of great data that he can bring to the podcast. I have a lot of great stories from working with different staffing companies in the industry. So we're going to use data, real data, valid and reliable data that we can use to unpack and talk about the state of the staffing industry.
So, Tom, one question that I think we should address, and the elephant in the room, is why should anyone care about staffing other than people in the staffing industry? And, I think about it and it's kind of like, staffing, huh? You mean those people down the street, that little building that says, Acme Staffing? Why is that so important?
It's such a great question, Chris, because we're at staffing is about 1.5% of the workforce. So just a sliver of the workforce. But here's why anybody would be interested in understanding more about staffing industry is because all the new human capital acquisition business models, they all emerge out of the staffing industry. So whether you want to call that the tip of the spear, whether you want to call that the think tank, that's where it happens.
Yeah, what's funny about that is we constantly see shifts in the way that U.S. labor is managed and the way employers structure employment. And interestingly, staffing is kind of it's that entry point. And economists are also fascinated by staffing because at least it used to be one of the single best predictors of whether or not a recession was coming. It was one of the few leading forecasts that are leading indicators that reliably showed when we were going to get a recession. Of course, some of that has changed, and we'll talk about that a little. But I think it's fascinating that at a time when people are asking, what is happening with the American workforce, what is happening with AI, all these different employment models are changing the way Americans think about work.
But on both sides of the equation, in terms of the buy side, the employer side, and the candidate side. Chris, you had mentioned about that the staffing industry was a predictor of a recession. So for most of the history of the staffing industry, and I'd have to go back 50, 60 years, somewhere in there, GDP and staffing were correlated. And in fact, we had advised our clients many times that the most valid economic indicator, variable to look at to see what was going to happen or what was happening in the staffing industry was the GDP. Well, about 4 years ago, the GDP and the staffing industry separated. This is when I first started, something's going on here that, first off, no one's writing about it, no one's talking about it, but the GDP was growing and staffing industry was declining. And here, now we track over the last 3.5 years, we've lost a third of the revenue in the staffing industry, and we've lost a third of the people that are on billing through staffing. However, there are industries that are growing that are acquiring labor. Any thoughts on any?
Well, there are several ways to look at this, but at the simplest level, first I have to do a quick digression. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we face in any part of employment and human capital management is what I call pandering. Pandering to the market, pandering to audiences, pandering to what people want to hear. And so, if you are an expert in human capital, very often you try and come up with the issue du jour that will attract the most people, the people who are going to buy consulting services from you. If and you may say, I'm going to say what they want to hear and what they expect to hear, so that they will be comfortable with me.
We've seen this with so much data coming in through the national associations. I've talked to so many executives that basically have said, I can't trust the data anymore. We can't make decisions about our company based on the data that we're receiving from the national associations that report on the staffing industry.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very important point because, uh, there's an old saw from Mad Men where they say, people, why do they buy something, and how does our advertising need to work? Well, people need to feel good. People need to, feel good about themselves. And I think in a very real sense, we sometimes use the data. Well, one of our commitments, I think, is we can't we can't be excellent without the truth. That's something we love to say at Aviante. And my sense here is that without the truth, we are not going to be able to understand what's truly going on here, nor are we going to be able to help people navigate their business to be more profitable. And it's not just staffing, it's employers.
Yes.
It's the entire U.S. economy and the labor economy in particular that we need to be concerned about.
Yes. So, hey, okay, so back, it's very important that businesses in general understand what's going on in the staffing industry, because subterranean, that is actually happening in their business as well. And I want to get back to just us talking about the state of the staffing industry, because I've had numerous conversations. In fact, to tell you a quick story here, I was working at a national conference, and a gentleman that I've known for years and years and years, extremely successful, has been in the industry as long as I've been in the industry. And we were at one of the networking events, and we were at in the corner of the room, and he kind of walked up to me and said, "Tom, is the staffing industry a dying industry?" Now that's just one, but and now I maybe me talking to you, maybe me talking to my wife, but I'm not going to get up in a public forum and say, "Hey, the staffing industry is a dying industry." But let me tell you, I've had numerous calls by people running enterprise size companies in the United States saying to me, making the staffing is a dying industry. So let's unpack that. Is staffing a dying industry, or are there new human capital business models that are emerging?
So I think there are a couple of things we can say, and to foreshadow, absolutely. Staffing is not dying; it is changing. It is morphing into a much broader category of different types of workforce solutions. One of the biggest challenges with the statistics that we are working with today is that we take them almost as if they were a biblical truth. And yet, what we are talking about is a sampling of data from an employer survey and from U.S. Census data that is conducted on a monthly basis by the U.S. federal government, which does pretty well, but is not going to be flawless in the way in the manner in which they collect their data. And that is the basis upon which we determine things. So when you're trying to understand how is the staffing industry doing, there is one specific number in the employment report, one NAICS code that specifically goes to temp staffing. But here's the problem with that. It only measures W-2 employees who are specifically employed within a staffing agency. So it measures one specific type of arrangement for one specific type of company. Now, stepping back for a moment and saying, well, what exactly is staffing? Well, really what it is it's labor for hire. If you're an employer and you suddenly need 20 people for 2 weeks, you can call a staffing company and they'll say, I've got 20 people who can work for you for 2 weeks. There are employees, not yours, employer, so you don't have to worry about the workman's comp risk. You don't have to worry about the unemployment risk. You're going to pay a premium to get those workers for those 2 weeks. They may charge 35, 50%, at least they used to. Of course, margins have compressed a little. But really, what you've got is a shock absorber for the economy when you need additional labor. So an employer may say, I need these people to keep the plant open, running. Or they may say, my God, orders are running ahead of our expected schedule. We don't know yet if this trend is permanent or if it's a temporary blip. So we're going to hire these people on a provisional basis and try and keep our overtime costs down. Either way, that model of staffing, it's essentially short-term labor and short-term employment. But there are a lot of different forms of contingent labor that didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, we have employers that say, hey, we're opening a warehouse in California. And you know what? We don't want the employment risk. We want somebody else to manage to be the employer of record entirely and manage this plant end to end. We have employers who are saying, you know what, I'm going to be my own little temp staffing agency, and I'm going to create a flexible workforce where we might have 1,000 people on our file, and they can all bid on coming in to work, for 200 jobs on a temporary basis.
You just mentioned employer of record, and I'm a firm believer, and I've told many people that and you're talking about flexible labor, the W-2 hourly, what we would call the traditional staffing business model, the W-2 hourly staffing business model, flex labor. We need 2 weeks or 13 weeks or whatever. An employer would need. I believe that staffing business model is going to continue to shrink, and one of the reasons. Well, I believe there are multiple reasons on why that's going to shrink. The what's happening with AI and AI changing jobs is one factor. What's happening with manufacturing automation is another factor. Jobs that are continuing to be offshored, meaning India and the Philippines, and exploding the nearshore, Mexico, Colombia, Guatemala. So employers are looking to acquire labor in there's all of these different things. And I know that one thing you and I have in common is that we on the strength finders, the strategy, we both check the box on strategy. So I'm always, and one of the things that we're trying to provide our clients is, hey, looking 3 years out, and what are the trends that are coming to us 3 years out, and how can we creatively respond? So I look at these as threats to the industry. So W-2 hourly, I'm a firm believer. I'd like to get your opinion as well. Do you feel like the W-2 hourly is going to continue to shrink? Number one. And then the other thing that I would like for us to talk about is that these threats to the industry, offshoring, nearshoring, AI, manufacturing automation, the changing preferences of the workforce with millennials and Gen Zs, how do we change those threats into opportunities? But anyway, so W-2 hour.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say is that right now the statistics show that starting in April of 2022, when temp staffing actually hit one of its all-time highs, in terms of as a percent of the total U.S. workforce, and it essentially declined consistently over, from over, 2.1% to, somewhere, I think a low of around 1.54%, somewhere, depending on your numbers. And it started to tick up slightly. And there are, this gets back to the pandering. There are a few people saying happy days are here again.
Yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
look, it's all going to be great. We're coming back. The economy is revving
Yeah.
up. Well, guess what? The economy has already been revved up while staffing was going down. And so to me, the evidence is very clear. There is structural change going on within the U.S. labor market that has fundamentally changed the value proposition for W-2 staffing in such a way that there are more valuable potential alternatives. And so if you're a bread and butter staffing agency, the question you have to ask is, what are my former customers doing in the labor market that is different, and how can I serve them, and how can I create more value in what I'm offering? And it's no longer about, hey, I need 20 generic bodies for 2 weeks. It's about, I need a permanent workforce solution of some kind, and that workforce solution is going to look different.
I know we're going to talk about this, but my Lord, now you're talking about having conversations with clients that, frankly, most staffing companies are not equipped to have. They don't have a sales force that can talk talk to their clients about those kinds of issues, understand from their clients workforce, their clients' workforce needs and that sort of thing. You shared some research with me that showed that in many of the key areas many of the key industries that typically acquire temp staffing, so manufacturing, hospitality, engineering, that the penetration rates are actually, even though they're growing, the temp penetration rates are actually decreasing.
That's exactly right. And so, one of the interesting things that you can do when you're looking at the decline in temp staffing is say, well, what's going on with those industries that have most used temp staffing in the past? So, you start by looking at the number of temp staffing employees, and then you step back and say, okay, what are all those adjacent industries that either have hired from temp staffing in the past or operate a lot like a temp staffing firm? So you have things like custodial services. You might have things like
Security guards.
security guards, in-store marketing, nurses, and the whole allied health field is often certified nursing assistants and and care service providers for elder care are all examples that you can look at. And then there, further afield, there are additional adjacencies, certain kinds of IT consulting and staffing. And what's interesting is that depending on what the need is, in some cases, the staffing agency is being replaced by a firm that operates sort of like a staffing agency, but they are in one defined industry or one defined field with deep expertise. So instead of saying we're a temp staffing agency who sometimes does custodial service work or can find custodial service workers, instead you say we are a custodial service provider, and that's all we do. We're experts at it, and we have amassed a large pool of labor that is immediately ready for that particular.
So this gets back to the change of the value proposition for the. So when I think about the future of staffing, and why it's important for all employers to have an eye on the future of staffing is that these business these human capital trends and whatnot are really, they first get played out in the staffing industry. But what I hear you saying is that I'm either going to have to become the highly niched with either specific skill sets, and maybe can you grow to enterprise size? That's a whole nother question that we would need to ask. Either I need to be my company's got to be highly specialized, highly niched, and uh, attract a pool of workers that I know that I can rely on. And I know you and I have talked a lot about the lifetime value of a contract employee and retention techniques of keeping them with your organization, all that stuff. Or enterprise size client where I've got highly skilled consultative sales executives that can have conversations with large employers, large companies about their labor needs and their goals and their economics and their financial goals, and then be able to present these various, either an employee of record or a recruitment process outsourcing or a W-2 staffing, that we're going to see the industry really morph or split between, like, those are going to be the survivors of the staffing industry. Is that what I hear you saying?
I think that's exactly right. You have to have, if there's one thing that has stayed invariant, since I went to business school in the 1980s, and before that, we talk about Michael Porter, and you
Oh
talk about
yes, right.
and you want to talk about where you want to be as a business, and it's kind of like, you can either be outstanding, at the grossest, simplest level. You can be outstanding at what you do. You can either be a quality leader or a cost leader. You can either have a very well-defined niche, or you can use a large presence and a broad presence in order to dominate your channel. But whatever you do, you never want to be caught in the middle. You never want to be, well, we're not the best and we're not the cheapest. We're just somewhere in the middle.
Stuck in the middle,
Stuck in the middle,
right?
because that is where you are going to get
Oh my God,
killed.
I've got so many clients that are stuck in the middle, and lack lack the strategic foresight to see where the industry is going and then how to best position themselves for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds Porter always makes me think of Monty Python, and frankly, and I think of brave Sir Robin, who almost fought the chicken of Bristol. It is that getting stuck in the middle that really
Yes, yes,
kills
yes.
a business.
Hey, can we talk about because this is, and I don't want to leave the candidate side of the equation out. So the other thing that I'm seeing, and I've been watching this and tracking this for a while. Of course, when I went to school, like, school was everything. There was not an option. Oh, you're going to go to college, and oh, you're going to get a degree, and oh, it's going to be a degree that you can provide for a family and all that. You're not going to get a degree in basket weaving, all of that. But we have a lot of we have a lot of the younger workers. They don't necessarily there's a distrust of the big corporation. They're not looking to work 40 hours a week. They're not looking to work for one employer. They want to work for three employers, and they want to work when they want to work. And there's a lot of information about on the candidate side where hey, I don't need to buy this kind of a car. I don't need to live in this kind of a neighborhood. That the whole that they might have a much higher value on the quality of life, being moms, being dads, being and all that. So, and that I think we would be remiss when talking about the future of the staffing industry if we don't talk about the value shift that's happening on the candidate side, and we also. I can go to I can the 3 mile radius. I can walk in any company in here, and I can ask the CEO, "Hey, what's your biggest problem?"
And they're going to tell you it's a generation. And,
Right?
I have to say this as a real beef. Good mental health is never good for employers in a certain sense. When I think about what it was like, at one point in my career, I had I was a consultant at a big eight consulting firm, and I, learning the ropes of advising companies and seeing how organizations work. And I noticed something about all the partners in the big eight firm. Mysteriously, they all came from very troubled backgrounds. They had problems with substance abuse. They were often on their third wives, but damn it, they could work and they could sell and they could produce. And it was almost like their work life was a way to flee from all of their problems, which was great if you're a consulting firm trying to maximize your billings. Mental health, not so much. Kept the psychologists employed. I think that to the extent that people value being a whole human being now, and they want the right, they talk about things like work-life balance, and the younger generation has much more fluency with what it means to be mentally healthy and how to get mentally healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And they're even developing new language and new terms for a wide variety of phenomena that you and I would have just kind of slopped
Right.
through.
Yeah.
And and then again, they didn't grow up with depression era parents like you and I
Yeah.
did,
Right.
where we knew that there were worse things than being mentally unhealthy, meaning being hungry.
Yeah.
So but I think that that means that employers have to think very differently about
Yeah,
how they're going to
it's
motivate and engage.
right. It's an attitude shift, right?
It's an attitude shift.
Yeah, because we do a lot of focus groups, so organizations will call us up and, hey Tom, can you come in and do an assessment? Sometimes we do a functional assessment, sometimes we do an overall corporate assessment, but those assessments will always include some kind of one-on-one interviews with managers, and then with bodies of employees, focus groups with those employees. Chris, I got to tell you, I am always so surprised that when we get into these focus groups, I find people that they want to make it. They're motivated. They want to make a difference. They're committed. They want to be part of an organization that has a greater cause. They want to live good, healthy lives, as you're talking about. They don't want to make the same mistakes that they've seen their parents make. Or they're not looking for that kind of a work life imbalance. And yeah, I can even talk about my own family, in regard to this, with my two adult children. So it's really an attitude shift at the top to recognize that, like, these young, they're not less skilled. I know we get all the complaints about, like, oh, they don't can't make phone calls, and oh, they're addicted to the mobile devices and things of that nature. But again, from the candidate side, future staffing, uh, uh, I really feel that there needs to be a major attitude shift. And why? Because most senior level people working in that own staffing companies, work in the staffing industry, they look at all labor as temporary labor, throwaway labor,
As
and
a
they
commodity, as a fungible
right
commodity, oftentimes.
and their own
Yeah.
their own internal employees. And so, like, I run into clients that have 80% turnover rates. How do you grow a company with 80% turnover rates? I just don't see. At some point, you just can't bring enough people. You just can't transfer enough knowledge. You just can't keep the relationships with clients long enough. And so, future staffing, this is and I don't know anybody that's talking about this, frankly. I don't know anybody that's talking to staffing companies about how do you develop engaging cultures? How do we can pull all the research out, right? The Gallup polls has got all the research that, like, hey, if 20% of your workforce is engaged, another 30% is semi-engaged, and typically 50% is disengaged.
And if they're disengaged, they're finding their engagement elsewhere.
Right? Yeah. It's imagine what that would mean to the productivity of an organization, or the financial results of an organization. So the future of staffing, on that side of the candidate side of the equation, I just feel that the winners are going to be people that successfully make that attitude shift, and get this that all people are temporary commodities.
So
That's
you're about to get me on a soapbox, and and I need to be careful
so
about my soapboxes. But
yeah,
I will say, I remember, I was at the University of Chicago, in the late '70s, and it seemed to me that um, there were a lot of people on campus. All they could talk about was Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand. That's all they could talk about: Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand. And it was like Milton Friedman said, it's okay and it's virtuous to make money and really not give a shit about anyone else. And Ayn Rand said you can be a captain of industry if you would like. And you know I remember reading a little Ayn Rand in high school, and I got over it in about 2 or 3 months. But there are other people who didn't get over it for 30 or 40 years, because what they did is they created an ethos and basically an apology, for for naked capitalism, and for a capitalism that says it's okay not to care, it's okay to put profitability above all else. And if there is something that I have a bone to pick, with policymakers in general on all sides, no is that we don't value human capital enough. And it absolutely kills me. So there are a lot of business leaders, would you try and have the conversation with a staffing leader or someone else, and you say, you know what, you really need to be thinking about your culture. And they're looking at you like you are some kind of alien. It's like, ooh, culture, that word again. I'm feeling, and suddenly they change the topic, or make a lewd joke or something. I you know but at the end of the day, what I have seen is that the most profitable and the most
right.
effective organizations in the long run, the ones who consistently generate the best returns over time, are also those who actually manage their human capital uh, with extraordinary.
It's
Yeah.
so important, so important.
So sorry about that. I just had to.
Yeah, no, 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 no. So I think where we're ending up here is that the state of the staffing industry is going over is undergoing some radical shifts, that the W-2 hourly is shrinking, that I call it the perfect storm of competitive threats. And that would be, now when we talk about a competitive threat, we're talking about an external. So offshore, onshore, manufacturing automation, changing preferences of candidates, the AI, everything that's happening with
Yeah.
AI and jobs. So that but I think we're both in agreement that, and you even have the data that shows that the W-2 hourly is going to continue to shrink, and that but businesses are growing and they're acquiring labor through these different business models, which I believe is the future of staffing. And the winners are going to be the people that understand the state of the staffing industry and can make intelligent decisions and about their where they strategically want to, that, as you had said, the value proposition of what they're going to provide clients, and the value proposition that they're going to provide candidates and their internal employees,
Yeah.
and attitude shift. And I think this is going to be a great segue, Chris, for us to talk about the future of staffing.
Uh-oh. Yeah. And what I would say about the future of staffing is that if you want to know the future, first find out what the market needs. I mean, let's talk to employers, and you sit down with an employer and say, what are your biggest concerns around people and the way you manage people in your organization? And one of the biggest decisions a company has to make is, who is an employee, who isn't an employee, what's inside the walls of our corporation, what is external to our the walls of our corporation, and if we need other kinds of assistance, who are the contractors? Are there employers of record? Do we need recruitment process outsourcing for certain? If you look at at the employment of a modern plant, go down any of these interstate highways and you see these giant plants that are being built with real estate investment trust dollars, one after another. First, somebody builds the facility, then somebody else moves into it to put in a super plant, and then some Fortune 500 company says, "Hey, I can shut down my small older factories and outsource a key part of my production to this new facility." The question you have to ask about for the future of staffing is, what does the employment model look like going on inside those plants? And I'll tell you something, little secret, it ain't 100% full-time employees.
Yes, right. Well, let's wrap this our initial podcast up, and let's get ready for podcast number 2, the future of staffing.
Yeah.